When we think of an economic collapse, we picture chaos. We picture the panicked crowds outside Wall Street in 1929, the weeping employees carrying cardboard boxes out of Lehman Brothers in 2008, the burning streets and shattered storefronts of Argentina in 2001. We expect a financial crisis to look and sound like an explosion, but the most dangerous economic collapse in modern history isn't an explosion at all. It is a slow, silent evaporation. Welcome to Tokyo 2026. Look at the pristine bullet trains gliding exactly on schedule, the towering neon skylines pulsing with energy, the immaculate streets where crime rates remain among the lowest on the planet. In a country that has been trapped in a crushing economic depression for more than 30 years, there have been zero violent economic protests, no riots, no burning banks. It is a society existing in absolute, profound peace. It makes no sense. How can a global superpower suffer a catastrophic, multi-decade financial freefall without its cities crumbling, or the rest of the world even noticing? How can a nation be simultaneously this advanced and this utterly bankrupt? The answer lies in the illusion of surface perfection. Japan has created the most beautiful, high-tech museum the world has ever seen. But the physical infrastructure is just a fade. To actually see the collapse, you have to look at the math. In the late 1980s, Japan was an unstoppable financial titan. They weren't just competing on the global stage, they were buying it. Japanese conglomerates famously purchased American icons like Rockefeller Center and Columbia Pictures. The consensus was clear. Japan was poised to buy the world. In 1989, if you looked at the top 50 most valuable companies on Earth by market capitalization, an astounding 32 of them were Japanese. Then, the ascent abruptly stopped. What followed wasn't a sudden explosive crash, but something far more terrifying, a permanent flatline. These became known as the lost decades. Trillions of dollars didn't move to other nations, and they weren't hidden in offshore accounts. The wealth simply evaporated into thin air. Asset values fundamentally reset and never recovered. While the rest of the globe spent the next 30 years continuously compounding its wealth, Japan stood completely still. The statistical reality is staggering. In 1995, Japan's economy was a behemoth, boasting a GDP equal to 73% of the United States. Today, that number has collapsed to barely 15%. Of those 32 globally dominant corporations from 1989, only one Toyota remains in the top 50 today. An economic engine of that magnitude does not just randomly stall. A specific mechanism shattered the momentum of the second largest economy on the planet. But to understand the true cost of these missing trillions, you have to leave the floor of the Tokyo Stock Exchange and look inside the wallet of an average Japanese worker. For a foreign tourist, Tokyo is a paradise of affordability. A purposefully weakened yen has transformed the country into a cheap, neon-lit playground. But for the people living there, that same currency is a financial cage. When you earn in yen, yet must import energy, food, and technology priced in global dollars, the world outside your borders quickly becomes inaccessible. The legendary Japanese salaryman dream, built on the absolute promise of lifetime employment, steady wage increases, and suburban homeownership, is dead. Today's workforce is caught in a slow, suffocating squeeze. The mathematical reality is terrifying. The average Japanese salary has experienced virtually zero real wage growth since 1992. Imagine working your entire adult life, watching the global cost of living skyrocket, while your paycheck remains permanently frozen in the 1990s. It is the ultimate manifestation of GDP stagnation, directly infecting your own wallet. This total loss of purchasing power permanently altered daily life. The sudden explosion of 100 yen shops like Daiso in the late 1990s was not a retail fad. It was a mass survival mechanism for a middle class quietly slipping backward. It is a profoundly claustrophobic existence. Millions of citizens, globally revered for their intense dedication and relentless work ethic, find themselves sprinting on a financial treadmill that has not moved a single inch in 30 years. How did such a highly disciplined nation get locked inside this cage? Who made the fatal mistake? The trap wasn't built overnight. It was constructed over 3 decades, through 3 distinct acts of economic suicide. In 1985, under intense international pressure, Japan signed the Plaza Accord, forcing the yen to rapidly appreciate against the US dollar. To offset the sudden devastation to their export dominance, the Bank of Japan slashed interest rates, flooding the domestic market with cheap credit. This ignited Act 1 of their economic suicide, a speculative mania of unprecedented proportions. By 1989, real estate valuations had become so detached from reality that the 1.3 square miles of the Tokyo Imperial Palace grounds were valued higher than all the real estate in the state of California combined. Then, the bubble burst. Stock and land prices collapsed, triggering Act 2. In a functional market, bad businesses are allowed to fail, liquidating toxic debt and clearing the way for new growth. But Japanese banks, desperate to save face and avoid reporting catastrophic losses, refused to let their clients die. Instead, they executed a quiet, systemic cover-up. Banks systematically rolled over non-performing loans, lending fresh cash to bankrupt corporations solely so those businesses could pay the interest on their existing debt. This accounting trick created an entire ecosystem of zombie companies living dead corporations kept on permanent financial life support, draining capital away from real innovators and freezing the economy in place. After 2 decades of stagnation, the government attempted Act 3. In 2013, they deployed the Abenomics bazooka, a desperate campaign of massive quantitative easing. The Bank of Japan printed trillions of yen to artificially force inflation, buying up unprecedented amounts of government bonds and exchange-traded funds. It worked flawlessly for the financial elite, enriching corporate balance sheets and inflating stock prices, but it utterly failed the working class. The astronomical wealth, created by the central bank's money printers, never materialized as actual wage growth for the everyday worker. A distinct, chilling pattern emerges across all 3 acts. At every single crisis point, policymakers chose to freeze the system. They deliberately protected legacy assets, bloated corporations, and the pride of the elite, rather than endure the short-term, necessary pain of a true market reset. With all this compounded debt, endless money printing, and decades of corporate failure, how has the nation not collapsed into total bankruptcy? Economists kept prescribing mathematical solutions, but they fundamentally misunderstood the disease. The problem wasn't in the spreadsheets, it was in the minds of the people. Western economic models are built on a singular, unquestioned assumption: humans inherently want more. Central bankers believe that if you make capital cheap enough, people will inevitably borrow, spend, and consume. But Japan reveals a terrifying flaw in that math. When an economy stops growing for 30 years, the culture permanently adapts to survive it. This is psychological deflation. It is not just a drop in prices, it is a collapse in desire. You cannot use 0% interest rates to stimulate borrowing in a population that has fundamentally given up on ambition. The children of the lost decades grew up watching their parents' relentless corporate loyalty yield nothing but frozen wages and silent despair. Their response was not violent rebellion, but quiet resignation. They became known as the Satori generation, the enlightened, or perhaps the surrendered. They actively reject the traditional markers of success. They do not want cars. They do not desire luxury goods. They have entirely abandoned the pursuit of home ownership. In extreme cases, this withdrawal manifests as the hikikomori phenomenon, where over 1 million people have completely severed themselves from society, retreating into absolute physical and psychological isolation. This evaporation of ambition has breached the boundaries of retail and infected human biology. Japan's plummeting marriage and birth rates are rarely analyzed correctly. They are often dismissed by foreign observers as a modern cultural quirk or a shift in social values. In reality, they are the direct, physical symptoms of profound economic hopelessness. When the future offers absolutely zero promise of upward mobility, starting a family transforms from a natural human milestone into an unbearable financial liability. The demographic collapse is simply the final stage of a society that has subconsciously concluded tomorrow will not be better than today. If the citizens have stopped consuming, stopped striving, and stopped reproducing, and the central bank has printed trillions of yen with no real-world economic velocity, a chilling question remains. What is physically holding the Japanese financial system together right now? The only thing holding it together is a debt machine of unprecedented scale, and that machine is currently catching fire. For 3 decades, Japan performed an impossible financial magic trick. It amassed the highest debt to GDP ratio in the developed world, over 250%, without suffering a catastrophic sovereign default. The trick worked because of a closed loop. Unlike emerging markets that borrow in foreign currencies from foreign investors, Japan owed the money to itself. The debt was entirely absorbed by its own aging, heavily saving citizens and, increasingly, by the Bank of Japan. Through a radical policy known as yield curve control, the central bank effectively nationalized the domestic bond market, deliberately pinning interest rates at zero. They bought up over 50% of all Japanese government bonds and ETFs. As long as interest rates remained at absolute zero, carrying a 250% debt load was mathematically painless. But the trick relied on one absolute condition: inflation could never return. Now, the everything changes here moment has arrived. Driven by global supply chain shocks and soaring energy costs, imported inflation breached Japan's borders. The cost of living surged, and the deeply devalued yen began to crush the domestic economy. This forced the Bank of Japan into an inescapable corner. After decades of holding rates at zero, the historic 2024 and 2025 pivots saw the central bank finally forced to hike interest rates to defend the currency. This is where the math becomes violently unglued. When a nation carries a debt load exceeding 250% of its GDP, raising interest rates by even a fraction of a percent triggers an avalanche. The cost to service that mountain of debt explodes. Suddenly, interest payments alone threaten to consume the entire national tax base, leaving nothing for infrastructure, defense, or the soaring healthcare costs of an aging demographic. The Bank of Japan is trapped. Keep rates at zero and watch the yen and purchasing power collapse, or raise rates and ignite a sovereign debt spiral. The 30-year machine is breaking, and the trap has finally snapped shut. The silent, pristine collapse is on the verge of turning deafeningly loud. But if you think this is just a localized tragedy about an island in the Pacific, you haven't been looking at your own government's balance sheet. Japan was never an anomaly. It was patient zero. The financial rot that hollowed out the Japanese economy has metastasized, and the rest of the world is now willingly infecting itself. Rather than learning from the lost decades, global powers have adopted the exact same playbook: a fatal addiction to 0% interest rates, the accumulation of staggering national debt, and central banks permanently intervening to prop up zombie markets. The historical parallels are undeniably precise. Look at China today. The catastrophic implosion of Evergrande and the broader Chinese property market is a perfect, terrifying mirror of Japan's 1989 real estate bubble burst. China's sprawling, empty ghost cities and its current plunge into a stubborn deflationary spiral prove it is walking the exact same path, battling the exact same systemic decay. But the contagion has also spread to the West. Following the 2008 financial crisis, the US Federal Reserve fundamentally copy-pasted the Bank of Japan's post-1990 playbook. The data points form a chilling timeline. Today, United States and European debt to GDP ratios are tracking almost perfectly with Japan's debt trajectory from the early 2000s. The West is inflating the same asset bubbles, masking the same underlying economic weakness with the temporary illusion of infinite money printing. Beneath the financial spreadsheets, the biological foundation is crumbling in the exact same way. Europe and the United States are now staring down the barrel of the identical demographic cliff that doomed the Japanese recovery. Western birth rates are in steady decline. The workforce is aging rapidly. There are simply not enough new producers being born to fund the exploding entitlement costs of an older generation, let alone consume the astronomical debt being continuously printed. You are not just looking at Japanese history, you are looking at your own immediate future. If the entire developed world is executing the same suicidal monetary policies while facing the exact same demographic collapse, how does this all end? Is there any way out for us, or are we doomed to the exact same fate? There is a way to survive the end of growth, but it requires the one asset most Western nations have completely lost. Modern economics is built on a delusion that infinite growth is mathematically and biologically possible. Japan is not an anomaly of financial mismanagement. They are simply the first advanced civilization to hit the ceiling. They reached the absolute end of the modern growth cycle before anyone else. But their true legacy is not the collapse itself, it is how they endured it. Japan managed a bloodless, graceful decline over 3 decades because of one invisible, unprintable asset: extreme social cohesion. The population collectively accepted the financial pain, sacrificing individual ambition to maintain absolute public harmony. They absorbed the stagnation without turning on each other. Picture the serene, unbroken peace of a Kyoto temple. Now contrast that with the streets of modern Western cities. Look at the deepening political fractures, the volatile protests, the hyper-individualism, and the widening chasm of mistrust between citizens. When the illusion of perpetual wealth finally shatters in the West, the ultimate test will not be economic, it will be cultural. As the United States, Europe, and China inevitably enter their own lost decades, a terrifying question emerges. Do we possess the deep social fabric required to share the burden of a shrinking reality peacefully? Or, stripped of the promise of infinite growth that kept us docile, will our societies simply burn? Japan is not a cautionary tale of the past. It is the museum of our future.